I stood in front of the rotting cabin in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, reading the will for the last time. Ethan Mitchell, the old decrepit cabin. Marcus Mitchell, $1.2 million mansion in Miami. My fiancé had just called me a pathetic loser and walked away with my brother. The frozen wind cut through my jacket as I stared at what my parents thought I deserved after 32 years of being their son. My name is Ethan Mitchell, and I've spent my entire life being the family disappointment. While my younger brother Marcus was building his tech startup empire, I was quietly working as a software engineer, thinking that steady work and genuine effort would eventually earn my parents' respect. I was wrong about everything. Growing up, it was always Marcus this, Marcus that. When I graduated summa cum laude from MIT with my computer science degree, my parents couldn't make it to the ceremony because they were throwing Marcus a surprise birthday party for his 21st. When I got my first promotion at the software company, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. But when Marcus landed his first investor meeting, they threw him a celebration dinner and invited half the neighborhood. The pattern was so consistent, I started to think it was normal. Marcus was the golden child, charismatic, ambitious, always talking about his next big venture. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who never caused trouble but never seemed to shine bright enough to matter. My parents would introduce Marcus as our entrepreneur son who's going to change the world, while I was simply Ethan, he works with computers. The worst moment came 3 years ago at Christmas dinner. I had just closed a major deal for my company, something I'd worked on for 8 months. When I tried to share the news, Mum cut me off mid-sentence because Marcus wanted to announce his latest funding round. The entire table erupted in applause for him, while my accomplishment got buried under his spotlight. That night, I realized I wasn't fighting for recognition anymore. I was fighting just to be seen as part of the family. Sarah Thompson entered my life 2 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. She was brilliant, driven, working as a marketing director for a Fortune 500 company. When she agreed to marry me, I thought maybe I'd finally proven I was worth something. She said she loved my stability, my kindness, how I made her feel safe. For the first time in my life, someone had chosen me first, but I should have seen the signs. Sarah's eyes would light up whenever Marcus called. She'd hang on every word when he talked about his business ventures at family dinners. She started suggesting I should be more ambitious, like my brother. That maybe I should start my own company instead of working for someone else. When Marcus bought his penthouse in downtown Miami, Sarah made comments about how successful people think differently and how maybe I needed to expand my vision. The funeral happened on a grey Tuesday in March. Mum and Dad died in a car accident, coming back from Marcus's latest business conference. They'd flown to Chicago to support him at some investor pitch. Even in death, they were there for him, not me. I handled all the arrangements while Marcus was too devastated to function. I picked the flowers, wrote the obituary, organised the service. Sarah kept saying it showed my supportive nature, but I could hear the subtle disappointment in her voice that I wasn't falling apart like Marcus. The will reading took place exactly 1 week later in the sterile conference room of Henderson and Associates. Marcus sat across from me in his designer suit, Sarah beside me gripping my hand with what I thought was comfort, but now realise was anxiety. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd known our family for decades. To my son, Marcus Mitchell, Henderson read in his monotone voice. I leave the family home in Miami Beach, valued at $1.2 million, along with $800,000 in liquid assets from the family savings and investment accounts. Marcus leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened, but not in the way I expected. I could feel her calculating, already planning what this meant for our future together. To my son, Ethan Mitchell, Henderson continued, and the room went quiet. I leave the family cabin in Alaska, along with all contents and belongings therein. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Marcus actually laughed, not a cruel laugh, just genuine amusement. The old cabin? Dad hasn't been up there in 15 years. I don't think it even has running water anymore. Sarah's hand went cold in mine. I watched her face change as the reality sank in. Her fiancé, the man she was supposed to marry in 3 months, had just inherited what everyone knew was a worthless piece of property in the middle of nowhere, while his brother got a mansion and nearly $1 million in cash. That night, Sarah asked me to drive her home instead of staying at my apartment like she usually did. We sat in her driveway for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration. Ethan, I can't do this, she said quietly. I thought your parents saw something in you that I saw. But they didn't, did they? They knew exactly who you were. And they left you a broken down cabin while Marcus gets everything. Sarah, it's just money, I tried to argue, but even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. It's not about the money, Ethan, it's about what it represents. Your parents spent 32 years watching both of their sons, and they decided Marcus was worth investing in and you weren't. What does that say about the man I was going to marry? She pulled off her engagement ring, the one I'd saved 8 months to buy, and placed it in my palm. Marcus called me today. He said he's always had feelings for me, and after seeing how your parents really felt about you, I think I need to be honest about my feelings too. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You're leaving me for my brother? I'm choosing someone who has a future, Ethan. Someone who takes risks and builds things and doesn't just accept whatever scraps life throws at them. Marcus is offering to help me start my own marketing consultancy. He believes in me in ways that... She stopped herself, but the damage was done. In ways that I don't. You're a good man, Ethan. You'll make someone very happy someday, but I need more than good. I need someone who fights for what they want, who doesn't just quietly accept being treated like they don't matter. She got out of the car, and I watched her walk up to her front door for the last time. 3 days later, I saw the social media posts, Sarah and Marcus, at some upscale restaurant in Miami, her wearing a new ring that probably cost more than my car. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation. Word spread quickly in our social circle about the inheritance and the engagement breakup. Friends stopped calling, colleagues at work gave me pitying looks. I'd hear whispers in the break room about poor Ethan and how some people just aren't meant for success. Marcus, to his credit, tried to reach out once. He called me 2 weeks after Sarah moved in with him. Look, bro, I know this is weird, but Sarah and I, it just happened. And about the inheritance, if you need money, I could maybe help you out. I mean, the cabin's probably worth something if you fixed it up. I'm fine, Marcus, I told him, and hung up. It was the last conversation we'd have for months. Sitting alone in my apartment every night, surrounded by the life I'd built that apparently meant nothing to anyone, I started thinking about that cabin. Mom used to tell stories about Grandpa Joe living up there when she was young, how he'd disappear for months at a time and come back with wild tales about Alaska. Dad always rolled his eyes at those stories, calling them the fantasies of an old man who couldn't accept civilization. But Grandpa Joe had loved that place. I remembered visiting once when I was 7 years old, before he died. He'd shown me how to fish in the stream behind the cabin, taught me to identify different types of trees, told me stories about the gold rush days. Marcus had been bored out of his mind, constantly asking when we could go home. But I'd been fascinated by everything. This place has secrets, Ethan, Grandpa Joe had told me one evening as we sat on the cabin's front porch watching the sunset. Someday, when you're old enough to appreciate them, you'll understand what I mean. At the time, I thought he was just being a mystical old grandfather. Now, with nothing left to lose and nowhere else to go, I started to wonder if maybe there was more to that cabin than anyone realized. The decision to go to Alaska wasn't rational. It was pure desperation, mixed with the need to escape the suffocating reality of my life in California. Everyone I'd ever cared about had made it clear that I wasn't worth their time or love. At least in Alaska, I could be worthless in private, away from the pitying stares and whispered conversations about my failure to live up to my family's expectations. I took a leave of absence from work, claiming I needed time to process my parents' death. My boss was understanding, probably grateful to avoid dealing with my obvious depression. I bought a one-way ticket to Anchorage and packed a single suitcase with clothes suitable for cold weather. The flight to Alaska was the longest 5 hours of my life. I kept replaying every conversation, every moment where I should have stood up for myself, every time I'd accepted being treated as less than. Sarah's words echoed in my head. You just accept whatever scraps life throws at you. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was exactly the pathetic loser she'd called me. But as the plane descended through the clouds and I saw the vast wilderness of Alaska stretching endlessly below, something shifted inside me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Whatever was waiting for me in that cabin, it had to be better than the life I was leaving behind. The cabin was exactly as worthless as everyone had said it would be. I stood in front of it after a 2-hour drive from Anchorage in a rented SUV, staring at what appeared to be 40 years of neglect. The roof sagged in the middle, several windows were boarded up, and the front porch looked like it might collapse if I put too much weight on it. But it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was standing on property that belonged to me, where no one could make me feel unwanted or inadequate. The silence was incredible. No traffic, no city noise, just the sound of wind through the trees and a stream running somewhere behind the cabin. I pushed open the front door, which stuck badly in the frame, and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Musty wood, old fabric, and something else I couldn't identify. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light, streaming through dirty windows. The main room was small but functional, with a stone fireplace, a simple kitchen area, and stairs leading to what I assumed was a bedroom loft. Everything was covered in years of dust, but underneath I could see that someone had cared for this place once. The furniture was handmade but well crafted. Books lined makeshift shelves along one wall. Fishing equipment hung neatly from hooks near the door. This wasn't just a cabin. It had been someone's home. As I explored the space, cleaning off surfaces and opening windows to let in fresh air, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Nobody here knew about my failures. Nobody was comparing me to Marcus or judging me for not being ambitious enough. I was just a man in a cabin in the woods. And for the first time in my adult life, that felt like enough. That evening, as I sat on the front porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, I found myself thinking about Grandpa Joe's words. This place has secrets. I looked out at the endless wilderness surrounding me and wondered what an old man could have been hiding out here for all those years. I had no idea that by tomorrow, my entire understanding of my family, my worth, and my future would be completely transformed. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the loft window and the sound of birds I couldn't identify. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality crashed back. I was alone in a broken cabin in Alaska because everyone I'd ever loved had decided I wasn't worth keeping. But strangely, the despair that had been crushing me for weeks felt lighter here, as if the vastness of the wilderness had given my pain more room to breathe. I spent the morning cleaning, partly to make the place livable and partly to keep my mind occupied. As I worked my way through the main room, I started noticing details that suggested this cabin had been more than just a weekend retreat. The kitchen had been modified with extra storage. The fireplace showed signs of regular use. Most telling, there were personal touches everywhere. Hand-carved wooden bowls, a quilt that had clearly been made with love, photographs tucked between books on the shelves. The photographs stopped me cold. There was Grandpa Joe, but not the frail old man I remembered from my childhood. These pictures showed him in his prime, a strong, weathered man standing next to mining equipment, holding up chunks of rock that glittered in the sunlight, grinning like he'd discovered something incredible. In one photo, he stood next to a younger version of my father, both of them covered in dirt and smiling broadly. Dad looked genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen in my lifetime. I was studying these photos when I noticed something odd about the kitchen table. One of the drawers appeared to be shorter than the others, like there might be a hidden compartment behind it. When I pulled the drawer all the way out, I found exactly that. A secret space containing a sealed plastic bag with papers inside. My hands shook as I opened the bag and found a letter written in Grandpa Joe's distinctive handwriting. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you found your way to the cabin and your parents have passed on. I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not sorry that you're here. Your father never understood what this place meant, never saw its potential. But I always knew you were different. You listened when I told you stories. You saw magic where others saw wilderness. What your parents don't know, what I never told anyone, is that this land holds more value than they could ever imagine. Your father thought I was a crazy old man wasting his time in the woods, so I let him think that. Better to be underestimated than to have people asking questions about why I kept coming back here year after year. If you want to know the truth about what I've been doing up here for the past 30 years, follow the coordinates I've written on the back of this letter. But Ethan, be prepared for your life to change completely. Some secrets are worth more than money. Some discoveries are worth more than the respect of people who never deserved you anyway. Your grandfather, who always believed in you, Joseph Mitchell. I flipped the letter over with trembling hands. Written in faded pencil were GPS coordinates. 64.0685 DGN, 152.27A82 degree W, along with a hand-drawn map showing a path from the cabin through the woods to a spot marked with an X. The rational part of my mind said this was probably just the ramblings of an old man who'd spent too much time alone in the wilderness. But the part of me that remembered Grandpa Joe's sharp eyes and knowing smile thought otherwise. He'd been the only family member who'd ever made me feel special, who'd treated me like I had value. If he'd left me something more than just a broken cabin, maybe there was a reason. I spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, a backpack, water bottles, the flashlight I'd found in the kitchen, and the GPS device from my phone. The coordinates were about 2 miles from the cabin, deep enough in the woods that I'd need to be careful not to get lost. As the sun started to set, I decided to wait until morning to make the trek. If Grandpa Joe had kept a secret for 30 years, one more night wouldn't matter. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace reading through more of his papers, I found evidence that my grandfather had been far more methodical than anyone realized. There were notebooks filled with detailed observations about the local geology, sketches of rock formations, and what appeared to be assay results from mineral samples. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Grandpa Joe hadn't just been hiding in the wilderness, he'd been working. The next morning dawned clear and cold. I followed the hand-drawn map through dense forest, using my phone's GPS to confirm I was heading toward the coordinates. The path wasn't obvious, but I could see subtle signs that someone had walked this route many times. Broken branches, worn spots in the undergrowth, small rock cairns marking the way. After 90 minutes of hiking, I reached a small clearing that matched the X on Grandpa Joe's map. At first glance, it looked like nothing special. Just trees, rocks, and scrub brush. But as I walked around the area, I noticed something that made my heart race. Hidden under a carefully constructed pile of branches and leaves was a metal hatch, like an entrance to an underground bunker. I cleared away the camouflage and found myself staring at a heavy steel door with a combination lock. Taped to the inside of the hatch was another note in Grandpa Joe's handwriting. Your birthday, month, day, year. You were the only one who ever remembered mine. My birthday, 05/15/1991. The lock clicked open on the first try. What I found below that hatch changed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather, my family, and my own worth. The underground space was larger than my apartment back in California. A sophisticated operation that had clearly been built and maintained over decades. LED lights powered by a small generator illuminated workbenches covered with mining equipment, geological surveys, and sample containers filled with what appeared to be raw gold. But it wasn't just the equipment that took my breath away. Along one wall, organised with scientific precision, were dozens of containers filled with gold nuggets and flakes. The labels showed dates going back to 1985, quantities, and purity assessments. This wasn't a hobby or a pipe dream. This was a full-scale mining operation that had been producing significant quantities of gold for 30 years. I found Grandpa Joe's final journal on the main workbench, and as I read through it, the full scope of what he'd accomplished became clear. He'd discovered a rich vein of gold running through the bedrock beneath this land and had spent 3 decades carefully extracting it, always taking just enough to avoid attracting attention. The entries showed his growing frustration with my father's dismissive attitude toward the cabin and his determination to ensure his life's work went to someone who would appreciate it. The final entry was dated just 2 months before Grandpa Joe's death. Spoke to Ethan today. He's the only one who still asks about the cabin, who remembers the stories I used to tell. Marcus treats this place like a burden. And David thinks I'm a foolish old man playing in the dirt. But Ethan has his mother's curiosity and his grandfather's patience. If anyone deserves to know what I've built here, it's him. I've updated my will to ensure he gets the cabin and everything in it. Someday, when he's ready, he'll understand what that really means. I spent hours in that underground chamber, documenting everything with my phone's camera and trying to process the magnitude of what I'd inherited. Based on the samples I could see and the detailed records Grandpa Joe had kept, I was looking at what appeared to be millions of dollars worth of gold. Possibly much more if the vein continued as deep as his geological survey suggested. But more than the monetary value, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to my grandfather. Every piece of equipment, every carefully labelled sample, every page of meticulous notes showed me a man who had worked with dedication and purpose for decades. He hadn't been the absent-minded dreamer my father had always described. He'd been a serious prospector who had made one of the most significant gold discoveries in Alaska in the past 50 years. When I finally climbed back up to ground level, the sun was setting and my mind was reeling with possibilities. But I also knew I was in over my head. This wasn't just about finding some gold nuggets. This was a major mining operation with legal implications, environmental considerations, and a value that would require professional assessment. Back at the cabin that night, I researched mining law in Alaska and found contact information for Jack Morrison, a lawyer in Anchorage who specialized in mining rights and mineral claims. According to his website, he'd been practicing mining law for 40 years and had handled some of the largest claims in the state. If anyone could help me understand what I'd inherited and how to handle it legally, it would be him. I called Morrison's office first thing the next morning and explained that I'd inherited property with potential mineral rights and needed legal guidance. His secretary scheduled me for an appointment that afternoon, and I made the 2-hour drive to Anchorage with copies of all the documents I'd found in Grandpa Joe's chamber. Jack Morrison turned out to be exactly what I'd hoped for. A gruff, no-nonsense man in his 60s who'd clearly spent decades dealing with wild claims and unrealistic expectations from amateur prospectors. He listened patiently as I explained about inheriting the cabin and discovering my grandfather's operation, occasionally asking pointed questions about the location and the documentation I'd brought. "Son," he said finally, studying the geological surveys and assay reports I'd spread across his desk, "your grandfather was a hell of a lot smarter than anyone gave him credit for. These aren't the papers of some weekend hobbyist. This is professional-grade geological work." He pulled out a map of Alaska and had me point out the location of the cabin and the mining site. His eyebrows rose as he cross-referenced it with mineral rights databases on his computer. "Well, I'll be damned," Morrison muttered. "Your grandfather filed a legitimate mining claim on this land in 1985, paid all his fees, followed all the regulations, renewed it every year like clockwork. According to these records, the claim transferred automatically to whoever inherited the property." He looked up at me with something approaching respect. "Congratulations, Mr. Mitchell. You're now the legal owner of one of the largest privately held gold claims in central Alaska." "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked, afraid to hope. Morrison leaned back in his chair. "It means that based on the sample analysis your grandfather documented here, and assuming the vein continues at the depth and purity he recorded, you're sitting on somewhere between $400 and $600 million worth of recoverable gold." The room spun around me. "Are you sure?" "I've been doing this for 40 years, son. I've seen a lot of dreamers with a lot of worthless rock. This isn't worthless rock." He tapped the geological surveys. "Your grandfather spent 30 years proving this claim. The question now is what you want to do with it. We spent the next 3 hours going over options. I could sell the claim outright to a major mining company for immediate cash. I could partner with a mining operation and take a percentage of the profits. Or, if I wanted to maintain control, I could lease the extraction rights while retaining ownership of the land and the gold itself. My recommendation," Morrison said, "is that you don't make any hasty decisions. Word gets out about discovery this size, you're going to have mining companies, investors, and every gold digger in Alaska knocking down your door. You need to decide what you want your life to look like before you tell anyone else about this." I drove back to the cabin in a daze, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been a failed software engineer with a worthless piece of property and no prospects. Now I was apparently one of the wealthiest individuals in Alaska, sitting on a fortune that made my brother's inheritance look like pocket change. But more than the money, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: vindication. Grandpa Joe had seen something in me that no one else had recognized. He'd trusted me with his life's work because he believed I was worthy of it. For the first time since my parents' funeral, I felt like someone had chosen me first. That night, as I sat on the cabin's front porch looking out at the wilderness that now represented unimaginable wealth, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. I'd been ignoring his calls for weeks, but something made me answer this time. "Ethan! Jesus! I've been trying to reach you for days. Where the hell are you?" "Alaska," I said simply. "Alaska? What are you doing in Alaska? Look, Sarah and I have been talking, and we think maybe we were too hasty about everything. Family is family, you know, and that cabin of yours, maybe we could help you fix it up. Turn it into something valuable." I almost laughed at the irony. "The cabin's fine, Marcus. Come on, bro. You can't just disappear into the wilderness because you're upset about the inheritance. It's not healthy. Why don't you come back to Miami? Stay with us for a while, get back on your feet. I've got some contacts in the tech industry down here who might be able to help you find something better than that job you had." "I don't need help finding a job, Marcus." "Ethan, I know you're hurt, but you can't just give up on your life. Mom and Dad wouldn't want you to become some hermit in Alaska just because things didn't go your way. The condescension in his voice, the assumption that I was running away because I couldn't handle real life, triggered something in me. For 32 years, I'd listened to this tone from my family. The patient, slightly pitying voice of people who thought they knew what was best for me because they'd convinced themselves I wasn't capable of knowing myself. "Marcus," I said quietly, "what if I told you that the worthless cabin you're so worried about is actually worth more than your mansion, your business, and your entire net worth combined?" He laughed. "Come on, Ethan, I know you're upset, but let's be realistic here. What if I told you that Grandpa Joe left me something worth $500 million? The laughter stopped. "That's not funny, Ethan. I'm not joking." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that our grandfather spent 30 years operating one of the largest gold mines in Alaska, and he left it all to me. I'm talking about the fact that I'm sitting on a fortune that makes your startup money look like spare change." That's impossible, Dad would have known. Dad knew exactly what he wanted to know. He decided Grandpa Joe was a crazy old man, so that's all he ever saw. But Grandpa Joe was a lot smarter than any of us realized. I could hear Marcus breathing heavily. "You're serious. You're actually serious." "Dead serious. I spent today with a mining lawyer who confirmed everything. The claim is legal, the gold is real, and it's all mine." "Ethan, listen to me. We need to talk about this properly. This affects the whole family. You can't just..." I hung up the phone and turned it off. Outside, the aurora borealis was beginning to dance across the sky in brilliant green curtains. I'd never seen anything so beautiful in my life. Whatever happened next, whatever decisions I had to make about the gold or my future, one thing was certain. I was done letting other people tell me what I was worth.